Hi guys, hello everyone, and today I'm going to be showing you guys a black opening Repertoire against e4. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to play the Sicilian defense to counter white's e4. To you guys who watched the last video, this is a sequel to that, showing how black can actually defend against e4. And last video we also talked about the Sicilian defense. Now we're going to delve deeper into the Sicilian defense and show you guys different ways white can play and different ways to counter. So the Sicilian defense starts off with e4, e4, c5. And now let's delve into different variations. First, if they go e4, let me just flip the board. e4, c5, knight f3. You respond by playing e6, the Taimanov variation. d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight to c6. The idea of this is that white cannot take, or they can, but it's not good because then you get 3 pawns in the center to white's 1, and you're going to go pawn to d5 and get a majority in the center. White normally responds knight to c3, a6, bishop to e2, preparing to castle. Also notice that if you didn't go a6 and went queen to c7 already, like most Sicilian defense players play, they can go knight to b4 and chase your queen away. But with a6, they cannot go knight to b4 since the pawn guards the square. So after bishop e2, you go queen to c7 as planned, f4, knight takes knight, queen takes knight, b5, preparing to develop this bishop onto the long diagonal. Bishop to e3, bishop to b7, castles, h5, preparing an attack on the king's side with your pawn. Now these are not all of the variations to the Taimanov Sicilian, so I please suggest that you research these openings at home and delve deeper into the variations. Notice in this position how black's king can stay in the center safely, since the bishop can go here and guard all the dark squares. Now white can gambit a pawn in the Sicilian defense by going d4. We call this the Smith-Morra gambit. Black usually accepts this gambit and plays knight to c6. Knight to f3, d6. Preparing to develop the bishop and also obtaining some central space. Bishop to c4, e6. Making sure that the bishop can't attack the c7 square. If somebody goes knight to f6 here, which is a mistake, white can go e5. If knight takes pawn, knight takes knight. Pawn takes, bishop takes pawn check. Notice how black's only move is to take the bishop. And now white can win the queen with queen takes d8. If pawn takes, white's got queen takes queen check. If king takes, white's got knight to g5, king to e8 to guard against a fork on f7, and knight to b5. Threatening 2 forks at once, white cannot defend this. If black instead takes the knight with knight takes d8, white's got knight takes e5. With major compensation for the lost pawn, white is going to go on to win this game. Because after, let's say, a move like developing the bishop, white can just go and do bishop to b5. If black takes the bishop, the knight takes. White is threatening a fork on c7, and there's no way to defend this. Rook to c8. Knight takes a7, and black is in a losing position. So instead, he goes e6 to stop this bishop from taking the f7 pawn. Castles, a6, making sure that no knights can come here to infiltrate or the bishop can't come here. Bishop to b3, bishop to e7, queen to e2, knight to f6, rook to d1. Rook to d1 is putting pressure on your queen because he's going to go e5 next. Suppose if you make a move like b5, he'll go e5. And since your pawn is pinned, it can't take back. So which is why you move bishop to d7 in this position, breaking the pin. Now, of course, these aren't all the variations, so I urge you to study these openings at home. The Alapin opening. It starts off with e4, c5, c3. The goal of this opening is so that white can play d4 without losing his central pawns. Because if you go e6, he can go d4, takes. He'll have strong center pawns. So knight to f6, e5, chasing the knight. Knight to d5. Notice how this is technically an outpost for your knight, since after c4, knight to b6, he can't go d4 anymore, which is the whole idea. Plus, after going c4, he's wasting a move because he went c3 already. So he goes knight f3 to develop his knight. Knight to c6, bishop to c4, knight to b6, preparing to kick the bishop away. Bishop to b3, d6, applying pressure onto the center. E takes d6, e takes d6, developing these two bishops and preparing the castle. d4, bishop to e7, castles. Castles, d5, knight to e5, obtaining a strong center knight. If knight takes, pawn takes, and this pawn is weak because it's on an open file. c4 to guard the pawn, and this is kind of like a Maroczy bind where white's pieces are locked up, so you can go and move bishop to d6 to secure this position, and it's roughly equal. So remember to study these positions at home with an opening book about the Sicilian. The Sicilian defense closed is going to be the next opening. e4, c5, knight c3, e6. Notice how white develops knight to c3 to protect the pawn, and then he doesn't have any intentions to go d4, which is why this is called the closed Sicilian. Instead, he wants to play it like a King's Indian defense and strengthen up for an attack. f4, a6. So now the knight can't go and go inside the weak dark squares. a4, d6. Knight to f3, knight to f6. g6. g3. Preparing for this bishop to go to g2 and be on this diagonal. Notice how this bishop isn't really that good on any other diagonals except this long diagonal. Bishop to b6, bishop to g2, bishop to b7, d3, bishop to e7. Notice how this position is getting kind of closed. So this is why both sides are making a lot of pawn moves. In the open Sicilian, it's not good to make a lot of pawn moves because every move counts. Castles, knight h3, preparing to storm in with g4, f5, and knight to c6, developing the last piece. Be sure to study these games at home. And I have a game. I played online in Lichess, and I played the Sicilian defense, and this is the Taimanov variation. e4, c5, knight to f3, e6, d4. Takes, knight to c6, the normal line. c4, trying to make a Maroczy bind so I can never go d5 without losing a pawn. Knight to f6, knight to c3. Bishop to b4, threatening to take this pawn since the knight is pinned to the king. f3, a6, making sure that no knight goes here and takes advantage of the weak dark squares. Knight takes knight, b takes c6, bishop to d2, castles. Making my king safe, even though it's good in the center, it's better to have it inside one of the flanks. Bishop to d3, bishop to c5, taking advantage of this weak diagonal. This is crucial because in the game my opponent never castled and it ended up being his downfall. So remember, always try to castle early. Queen to e2. Sorry. He prepares to castle queenside with his rook and king and be a bit safer than he is in the center. d5, making a break in the center. When the king is in the center, you should always try to make breaks in the center. C takes d5, c takes d5. Bishop to g5, pinning my knight. Notice how if he took, my knight would take, and then the center would be really open for his king. He would probably go knight takes, pawn takes. He would want a castle, but then the c file is open. And he can't castle kingside because this bishop is guarding the g1 square. So instead he went bishop to g5, bishop to b7, e5, trying to take advantage that my knight is pinned to the queen, and he's trying to win my piece. But there's a technique. Whenever this happens, you should go h6. In this game, he immediately took, which isn't the best move. He should have went bishop to h5, bishop to g5 to break the pin while threatening the bishop. He'll have to retreat the bishop, and then I can retreat my knight. But it kind of weakened my king side, but I'm also putting pressure on the center, so it has a bit of compensation. It's also protecting this bishop. If bishop takes bishop, knight takes, he can castle, but then this pawn is really weak, since it's only guarded by the queen, and the pawn can't really guard it because this pawn is guarding that square. So he took the knight. G takes f6, f4. G takes e5, queen takes. Notice how if he did take with the f pawn, he would have an isolated pawn in the center where my pieces could easily attack it. Like this bishop can go here. I can even try to like undermine it so that I have two center pawns. Two center pawns. Queen to h4 check after queen takes e5. g3, queen to g4, king to e7. Notice how after g3, queen to g4, his king cannot castle, since this spot is occupied, and this spot is occupied by my bishop. King to d2, rook to c8, rook to e1. Well, now his king is in the center. It's the perfect time to make a break. So I went d4 to kick his defenses away. He went king to c2 because if knight to d1, I would have bishop to b4 check. He'll have to block, or else he would suffer from forcing move, I guess, because there's no other move. He has to block. And then pawn takes knight is the same thing as before. It's just worse. Because now is with check, he has to take, and takes, I win his queen. If knight to e2, I've got bishop to b4 check, king to d1, queen to f3, bishop to c2, rook takes bishop, king takes rook, rook to c8. Notice how these rooks aren't active in the defense, so you can actually sacrifice pieces when their pieces aren't active, because they're technically not even doing anything. Rook takes knight, sacrificing a second rook to open up the position. Queen takes pawn check. King to king to b1. Queen check. King to c1. Bishop to a3 check. And then that's checkmate. Notice the power of these two bishops in the middle game. So when the king is open, you shouldn't want to have bishops. You shouldn't want to have knights over bishops, because if the position is open, then the knights can't really do anything. They're locked in. Not really locked in, but they have restricted mobility compared to the bishops. And then look, the knight can only go to these squares, but the bishops control large amounts of territory and can threaten stuff way more than the knights. So d takes knight, pawn takes pawn. Bishop to b4, taking advantage of a pin. c4, bishop takes rook. Rook takes bishop. Bishop to d5, taking advantage of the pin again. This is why it's not good to have your king in the center, because it can get pinned, skewered, and get attacked way more easy, unless if it wasn't a flank. King to b3, rook to b8. King to c3, rook to c8. King to d4. See, now it's in the center of the board. Not even in the center, like in the center of the board. Now it's extremely vulnerable. Oh, my bad. Rook to d8, taking advantage is in the center. King to c3. Notice how it's actually tied down into the center for my rooks, because the position is so open. Bishop to g2, king to c2, queen to g7, queen takes queen, king takes queen, rook to e5, rook to c8, rook to a5. My pieces are just better placed, and I'm up a whole rook. So I went on to win on move 47, which is like 15 moves later. Thank you guys for watching this, and please remember to study these openings at home. Remember, studying them at home is better than watching YouTube videos. And please remember to like and subscribe, and click the notification bell to see more videos. Thank you for watching.